Hey, Dad.
Hey, Logan.
Why shouldn't religious people be opposed to gay marriage?
I don't know why.
Because Jesus had two dads and he turned out just fine.
But what if his dads killed him? I thought I'd raised you better than this.
No.
You're listening to The Wayward Willis with Jon and Logan, where two atheists discuss religion, culture, and maybe some politics. If you're offended by blasphemy, profanity, or you hate fun, this podcast may not be right for you. And now, on to the show.
Hey, you.
It's us.
The worst pig farmers you'll ever meet.
I'm Jon.
And I'm Logan, and today I'm recording this episode of my underpants.
And today we're going to reflect on all of our failed relationships and realize that what was missing all along was Jesus. We're talking about marriage.
Marriage is what brings us together today.
Stop saying that!
So, what even is marriage?
Well, the dictionary defines marriage as the state of being united as spouses in a consensual and contractual relationship recognized by law. It's basically a way for people who are perfectly happy with each other to ruin their relationship.
Well, that seems a bit dramatic.
I have a sample size of 2 with conclusive results.
Wow.
Religious definitions of marriage come from a wide range of scripture and typically include the view that God made humans, male and female, with the intention of having them joined together for life under a sacred vow made between them and God.
I CC God in on all of my sacred vows.
Or sacred cows.
Moo. I was trying to... Moo. I don't know. I'm done.
Ridge?
No, we're done.
All right. Well, this is what they're talking about when they use the term traditional marriage. Christians pull from the Old and New Testaments for defending traditional marriage. Genesis 2:24 says that a man will leave his mother and father and become one with his wife.
On a molecular level.
Obviously, a binary view on the participant list. But the funny thing here is that God says this to Adam and Eve, who had no parents, and I would assume no concept of what a parent was. They also had no concept of procreation because it wasn't until God kicked them out of the garden that he cursed them with bratty kids.
And a lack of hive mind communication. Damn you, Eve.
That is so last episode.
It will never go away.
As a crazy side note, God had tried to mate Adam with animals before he broke down and created Eve.
Wait a second. That's actually part of the Bible?
Yep. Genesis 2:20 describes how Adam named all of the animals, but didn't really find any of them to be marriage material.
He clearly didn't encounter any manatees. Barbara Manatee.
Manatee.
You are the one for me.
One for me, one for me. Okay, so for all of those who don't watch VeggieTales, and I don't blame you, let's move on. At this point in the Bible, it's a ridiculous statement to say that someone would leave their parents, and if we're being honest, it's a red flag that this book was written by people who were trying to create history well after the fact. What they're saying is that men and women were created by God to grow up, marry each other, have kids, and live happily ever after.
In a galaxy far, far away.
Where no one can hear you scream. So this is reinforced in the New Testament when Jesus talks about how God made boys with penises and girls with vaginas, and they're supposed to stay married forever.
The penises and vaginas? That's a really long time to have sex.
Or to be a penis. As the moral leader of Christianity, Jesus had the chance here to contradict Old Testament law and say something more worthwhile, like, you can marry who you want as long as there's mutual consent and you respect each other as equals. But he doesn't. It's just more of the same.
We could always just pretend it's implied.
Not a chance. Jesus actually validated the Old Testament garbage on several occasions and even directly said that he didn't come to earth to abolish the Old Testament law, but to fulfill it.
Well, we could pretend that that didn't happen too.
We could just pretend that everything in the Bible didn't happen. Honestly, it's not a stretch. Hey. To add to this, Paul wrote in I Corinthians,
oh god, what is this, a crossover episode?
that believers should not be unequally yoked to non-believers, meaning specifically that Christians should never marry atheists, but also not Muslims, Hindus, Scientologists. Actually, nobody should marry a Scientologist, so I've got his back there.
But Tom Cruise deserves some love too, or something.
Nicole Kidman and Katie Holmes might beg to differ. I hear he's an abusive asshole. People are saying. ... Also, when you get married, you apparently become an ox or something.
Is that a fat joke?
Hey, I gained 50 pounds every time I put a ring on it, and it was not a 50-pound ring. But hey, if you want to get married, then the yoke's on you.
I see what you did there. Good job.
Anyway, this isn't a rule for Christians, but there are some groups that take it very seriously. Focus on the Family, for example, says, the choice of a lifelong mate is a matter of profound importance, second only to that of a person's relationship with God.
Unless you're a male praying mantis, in which case nothing is of any importance when you find your mate, because then you are no longer in possession of a head.
What they're saying is that being a good Christian is more important than being a good spouse or having a head. I could be putting words into their mouth, but it's not really that much of a stretch, if we're honest.
Let's face it, though. There could be much worse things to shove in people's mouths.
Like black olives. Fuck those things. They taste like sadness.
Whoa, first of all, that's extreme. And second of all, very wrong. Black olives are great.
Ugh, you're disgusting.
Do you hate green olives, too?
Yes, they're so gross.
Do you hate fun?
No, I love fun. I don't like sadness.
Black olives are fun.
No, grapes are. Okay, moving on. Muslims are an Abrahamic religion like Judaism and Christianity, so they're pretty much the same on the basic idea of marriage, but Sunni Muslims also include a thing called nikah misyar. I am sure I mispronounced that, which is
bad.
But this is like a prenup. This modification of the marital contract specifies the rights and duties, especially in cases of polygyny, of each party involved in the marriage. When there are multiple wives, the contract specifies the equal division of the man's attention between them all. You know, because when you have a bunch of wives, you need a lawyer to draw up a calendar for you.
I have no words.
You also don't have multiple wives.
True.
Or a lawyer.
True.
Also, even if polygyny is allowed, polyandry is not. It is not okay for a woman to have more than one husband, ever. But when you think about it, why would you want to have more than one husband? Men are dickholes, and one is surely enough.
I still have no words. None.
None is a word.
Stop it.
So, much like the Christian notion of being unequally yoked, Muslims actually codify the ability to marry non-Muslims, and, much like you'd expect from a deeply patriarchal religion, it is the men who are allowed to broaden the pool of prospective wives, not the women with their husbands.
Words. They don't exist.
You're getting a dictionary for Christmas this year.
Yes. What I've always wanted.
To be fair, this is the more traditional view, and Islam seems to have loosened up a bit in this regard. However, the religion states that Muslim men can marry non-Muslim women, but they have to be people of the book, which means another Abrahamic faith like Judaism or Christianity.
Or librarians. They're people of the book.
Nice! Moving on. It's important to note a few things about religious dictates on marriage. First, they hold that the binary genders, male and female, are the foundation of the institution. This is why groups from many religions and sects oppose same-sex marriage at a basic level, but they add on top of that the idea that the entire reason for marriage is to produce offspring. Adam and Steve can't make butt babies, so they're not allowed to get married.
But if you've ever heard stories about butt babies, you wouldn't want them in the first place, Steve.
Oh yeah, food babies are bad enough. The second item of note is that a marriage is supposedly an unbreakable vow between not just you and your spouse, but also God. It's a holy threesome.
That's also what you call a threesome with 3 girls.
Go to your room.
But there are so many holes.
No. There are ways that religions validate the idea of divorce, but they all hold that it's supposed to be the exception and is only acceptable in extreme circumstances. Judaism was strict on this point and held that even when people got divorced, they were still married in God's eyes, and that's why a person remarrying or having sex after divorce was guilty of adultery.
But let's face it, anything you do as an adult is adultery, because adulting and stuff.
Literally cannot even adult.
Nor can I, my friend. Nor can I.
A third thing is the rampant polygamy in the Old Testament that doesn't seem to be an issue for Christians, even though it breaks their definition of traditional marriage. Several kings and patriarchs of the religion had a wife, and several, if not hundreds, of concubines.
So what even is a concubine, if not a convicted porcupine?
I'm not glad you asked, Logan. Basically, it's a woman who lives with a man without being married to him. Generally speaking, the man is already married, so it's a little different than equating concubine
Porcupine?
to girlfriend. Do not introduce your girlfriend to people like, this is my concubine.
This is the only way to introduce your girlfriend, honestly.
The reason you don't want to do that is because a second definition of concubine is a wife of inferior condition.
I would like to retract my previous statement.
Good boy. Why do we even have a word that means that anyway? Fuck our language. So back to the original topic. King Solomon is said to have 700 wives and 300 concubines.
Porcupines.
It sounds like bullshit, but whatever. That's enough women where it would take you 3 years to even see them all if you spent one day with each of them. These women couldn't even have been considered booty calls.
I mean, I feel like that's probably the epitome of booty calls. Hitting homegirl up once every 3 years with a text message that just says, "You up?" Except back then it would have been a hand-delivered note on a horseback or something. I guess it doesn't have quite the same charm, but...
Plus, you would have had to plan way ahead.
See you in 3 years, bitch.
So, Gideon was said to have many wives and a concubine.
Porcupine.
And had 71 sons from them all. Now, this story sounds pretty nasty when you consider that the Y chromosome isn't always the fastest swimmer.
Not without steroids, at least.
So it either doesn't mention that he also had daughters, because girls aren't important, or it implies that he didn't give a shit about, or possibly even drown the babies who came out with vaginas.
Or he was lucky as fuck. I bet he wished that they had the lottery back then.
Honestly, I have no idea which one it is. Let's assume the former and dial back the horribleness.
If only just a bit.
King David was also said to have had many wives and concubines.
Porcupines?
You done?
Nope.
And the way it's described, it almost sounds like he thought of them like Pokemon.
As in, gotta catch 'em all?
I actually think he may have caught them all. Anyway, to contrast his story to Gideon's, the Bible actually mentions that he had sons and daughters. So I'm going back to Gideon as a baby murderer.
Or a lucky bastard.
I don't know. What an asshole. So I was looking up weird marriage laws just for fun. You want to hear some of them?
Not really, but I have a feeling you're going to tell me anyway.
You are correct, sir. Did you know that in Delaware you can annul your marriage if you say you did it on a dare? I feel like that should be the only reason anyone gets married.
Manchester.
Bet.
No balls, you won't.
Do it.
Make it stop.
In Kentucky, you're not allowed to marry the same person 4 times. Marrying and divorcing the same person 3 times? Cool. Doing it one more time? No way. Get your ass out of this courthouse. You make bad decisions.
I feel like this should be less about law and more about common sense.
It's Kentucky. Moving on. In Salem, Massachusetts, it's illegal for married couples to sleep nude in a rented room. That's because if you do, you might get your marriage all over the sheets. Nobody wants that. Keep it to yourself, perverts.
That's why you hear about all these people outright purchasing hotels, because it's better to make a bad property purchase than sleep with clothes on.
I almost don't disagree with that. I have no equity in my house, but I swing free, baby.
Oh God, no, please.
In New Orleans, in Nolans, it is...
Nolans.
It is illegal for palm readers and fortune tellers to perform a wedding. Because believing you can see the future just makes a mockery of the sacred institution that should be all about pledging an oath to an invisible person and his murdered son. Pfft, silly palm readers.
What unfortunate news. I was planning on having only palm readers and fortune tellers at my wedding and having them only predict each other's fortunes. I can only imagine how much fun that would be to witness.
One of them could just be like, I can see that you're about to tell me my fortune. And the other one would be like, I see that you're about to tell me your fortune. Well, with all that nonsense out of the way, I'm going to say goodbye to Logan for a few so he can do whatever it is Logan does until after the interview.
Definitely not committing the sins of Onan.
I have been looking forward to this week's interview for a while now. My guests are each part of about 4,000 podcasts and are deeply entrenched in the LGBTQIA and secular spaces. To be honest, they make me feel like a slacker, but I'm going to try and keep up today, and I'm positive it'll be a lot of fun. I'm talking to Marissa McCool and Ari Stillman. How are you two doing?
Fantastic. Thank you for having us.
I'm surprised that you think that I do things because I don't really actually do things.
Sounds like you're kind of like Logan on my podcast. So you are both on a bajillion podcasts, and I'm really enjoying your wit and humor, but you also tackle some really tough issues. So are you happy with the visibility that you've gotten and the platform that you have just to get this information out there and to have these conversations?
Visibility has been really important for our particular sect of the atheist community, if we can even call it that anymore. particularly because a good number of them have no problem throwing us under the bus, while with the other hand talking about equality and freedom. So we not only have to fight against like the religious, people who we can predict, but it's also a matter of which cis white guy is going to throw us under the bus next. Which guy's going to say we're a boutique issue or say something awful to reach across the aisle to, the right wing in order to say, yeah, we don't get along on much, but at least those transes are weird, right?
Oh no. Ari, what are your feelings on it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on which podcast you're talking about because, my main podcast is the Gay Atheist Manifesto. I don't really want to call it my podcast, but it's the biggest podcast that I'm a part of. And that is really focused on more of an educational side. It's more focused towards straight, cisgender, secular people. I believe we probably have a few listeners who are religious. I don't know of any personally, but we probably do. I don't know. I could be just totally making that up. So that's really more of the education side. And then the podcast that Riss and I do together, The Cis Are Getting Out of Hand, as you can tell by the title, is a show which is supposed to be for trans people or non-binary people or anyone who doesn't consider themselves cis, because the reason why we started it is because the cis were getting out of hand on Facebook one week, and we were just messaging back and forth about, oh my God, like they are coming out in full force. And we were just like, we need to vent about this. So I came on Inciting Incident and we recorded an episode just venting about all the things that cis people were doing. And Riss was like, we need to make this an actual show. And so we started a Facebook page and we were like, the show is for trans people, but cis people are allowed to listen if you hate yourself enough. And so it's been really good for, I've gotten feedback from trans people, and I'm sure Riss has as well, about the show, talking about how it makes them feel really empowered. It makes them feel like they have a space where they can vent about the things that cis people do to them without having to worry about a cis person's feelings, which is what usually happens in most spaces. But
we're stopping every 5 seconds to define words again.
Exactly. But we've also gotten some great feedback from cis people too, which is, I mean, I guess it's kind of surprising, but they're like, hey, I love the show. I love it when you hate on our kind. It's great.
No, but I was going to say, I do think that you're selling it kind of short because I enjoy the heck out of that show, to use your word, right? But you're dealing out a much deserved hecking to people who are no friend to the community. And, I wanted to thank you because when I heard that you were letting just kind of everyone come on and show their support, I immediately was like, we have to do this. We've got to do it. I grabbed Logan. I was like, just do this with me. I don't care what else you've got going on, and so that I can send it to Riss and we can get it on there. But, where do you see the cis are getting out of hand going compared to like the Inciting Incident or the Gay Atheist Manifesto or the SJW Circle Jerk?
Well, the SJW Circle Jerk is going nowhere. That's just a fact.
Oh no,
we're doing anything with that because that's how we want it. We don't want it to be a real show. That's the whole point of the show.
Right.
So now Riss can answer the real question.
Well, Inciting Incident is much more of a current events interview-based show. What we do with This Is Getting Out of Hand is not only we have a skit generally that makes fun of whatever our particular main topic is going to be. And that's usually the most popular part of our show.
Right.
But there's also the fact that we have trans people on, and most of them are usually not podcasters. And that's important because there's a certain image you can get of someone as a podcaster, or, there's this, to borrow someone else's show name, this SJW Circle Jerk of trans podcasters who go on each other's show. I think I've been on Gay Atheist about 9 times now. And it's been important to get some of these other voices out there because we've talked to people who were or are homeless. We've talked to people who are disabled. We've talked to people who are dealing with the medical system. And
who are dealing with mental illness and disability and have lost friends to suicide and all sorts of stuff.
Right. And these are super serious issues that impact our community to a much greater percentage than the general population. And a lot of people just want to ignore them or blame it on the fact that we are trans. And we're sitting there going, no, this stuff happens because of how you treat us because we're trans, not because we're trans. That's an important distinction.
Yeah, it really is. And you can see it with, the way that a lot of people's, a lot of cis mentality is that, well, if you would just stop being trans, or you would just stop being gay, or you could just stop being weird, then you wouldn't be unhappy.
Couldn't you just make your life simplified so I could get it? Can't you just do that?
Right.
And even the people who mean well, who aren't necessarily, they don't consider themselves, transphobic or whatever, which I guess most transphobes probably don't, but they would say oh, you can be trans, just don't shove it in my face all the time, and don't expect me to have to change the way I speak about you and the words that I use and the way that I interact with you and the rest of the, trans people that might be in their life. So, they don't necessarily have a problem with you being trans. It's just they don't like it when it affects them, which is why we have to heck them all the time.
Yes, and you should. So, yeah, I mean, that's kind of, it goes into another topic. I want to touch on it just briefly because I had another podcast question for you. But yeah, when you're talking about how, everybody's fine with you being trans or non-binary or queer or whatever until such time as you ask me to call you they or whatever your chosen pronouns are going to be. And, we've seen this with some fairly high profile people lashing out at having to remember all of these silly pronouns. And
you'll go to jail in Canada if you don't use the pronouns correctly.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, I haven't spent any time in jail in Canada, so
gulags.
Given that, even with cis people, when cis people are talking to each other, they can address them by their name, or they can use pronouns like they when they're just talking about groups or in third person. So what the fuck is so hard for idiots to grasp here about pronouns?
I would say it's a lot easier to complain and feel self-righteous about something or write it off as our problem than it is to actually learn something. It's a lot easier to go, oh, this shit's weird. All these SJW trans people had Tumblr invent their gender identity and now suddenly they think they're special. It's a lot easier to blow it off like that than to acknowledge someone as a person, because when you dehumanize someone, it's much easier to blow it off.
Yeah, it's not so much that they don't understand, although I have run into that occasionally with using they them pronouns because people are trained to think that is only plural and I'm one person, so why would they call me they them? But in the case of, for example, binary trans people who use he or she pronouns, of course people understand how that works, but they still refuse to use it because you're not conforming to how they see you or whatever their ideology is about gender and how you were born one way and you can't become another way. And they really care more about being right or being, to use a strange phrase here, ideologically pure than respecting somebody else. They don't necessarily care if it hurts your feelings because they don't think your feelings are any kind of a priority.
Right.
Yeah. And the thing I always say, I probably say this every podcast at some point, you don't have more of a right to our identity than we do. And the minute you start saying something like, this is what you actually are, or your genitals determine this, or chromosomes, or biology, or basic science, any shitty argument that you think we've heard for the first time from you, we've already heard it, and we already don't give a shit.
Right.
People a lot of times will be like, well, you can't force me to use the right name and the right pronoun. It's not against the law. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. You don't technically have to use it, but I don't have to like you or be friends with you or think that you're a good person if you are going to refuse to call me how I want to be called. So, hey, we both have freedom of association and free speech. So if you decide that you aren't going to respect me, then I'm not going to give you the time of day either.
My legal name was changed about 7 months ago. So, there's been kind of that period of, okay, what shitty excuse are you going to use this time? I'm going to call you what's on your birth certificate. I'm going to call you what's on your ID. I'm going to call you what's on your social security card. Well, all of those say Marissa now. So what is it? You're going to call me the name that's still on some of that forwarded junk mail that I'm still getting from my previous address?
Right.
How low are you willing to go to be an asshole?
I can't understand it. And obviously, I don't have to personally deal with this, but I listen to your podcasts and I, read articles, and I feel like it's not difficult to be empathetic to these issues. It honestly shouldn't be hard to see how it hurts people and how it divides people and how it alienates people. And you should always just strive not to do that. You don't want to treat people that way. And I don't know where I was going with that, but it just seems almost intentionally cruel sometimes. And then other times it just seems completely ignorant in like the bad sense of that word. Not just like you don't know because no one told you, but like you don't know because you don't want to.
And it's not even a don't want to. It's especially this like anti-PC or anti-SJW or anti-feminist, whatever it's called. It's centered around the fact that people keep calling you out for being an asshole, and you would rather make it their fault for being hurt, for not being called the right thing, or for being so easily offended these days. It's far more important for you to be right than it is for you to care about the feelings of another person. And that's what it centers down to. Look at any of the PC arguments that Trump was making. It's like, oh, this is too PC, so they won't say this incredibly hurtful, racist thing I'm about to say. It's like, yeah, because if you replace the word PC with not being an asshole, suddenly it doesn't sound like something you should be complaining about. Yeah, all these people are not being an asshole these days. What's up with that?
I really like that. But yeah,
goddamn liberal education system is teaching people to be so not an asshole these days.
Oh, God, how could they even do that?
It was particularly
by teaching them that trans things exist, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For some, I went to the University of Pennsylvania, and that was particularly high profile because that's where Trump is an alum. And we had a lot of hate preachers that would come to our campus, usually to bitch about us. And it seemed like more people were willing to go out of their way to keep us from counter-protesting than they were to deal with the fact that these hate preachers were harassing people and following them with bullhorns and shouting slurs at them. And that's where that free speech absolutism thing gets harmful, because what you have here is a grown group of people who came onto a college campus to harass 18-year-olds. And you're more concerned about their right to bully and use hate speech than you are to at least let us have a say in what happens to us. And that's where the argument of the whole free speech absolutism and things happening on campuses break down. Because when people look at it a certain way, all they see are college students protesting. It's like, what are they protesting and why? Is it the fact that Milo Yiannopoulos is coming to their school and doxing people and harassing them and dead naming them and trying to bully them into suicide? Yeah, maybe that's a thing worth protesting. Maybe the college shouldn't invite Milo Yiannopoulos or Richard Spencer to their school, right, University of Florida? Maybe you shouldn't give a platform to Nazis or people who go out of their way to try to get people to kill themselves. I don't know. I'm just funny like that, I guess.
Yeah.
That's such a good joke. That would never happen.
Okay, so now that we've heard you just make up a bunch of stuff.
Right.
I really appreciate that you will, come on here and talk to me, an ignorant cis person, about all of these things because, I feel like I have a good grasp on these issues, but at the same time, I have to acknowledge, just like I would do with white privilege, I have to acknowledge that, these aren't my struggles. I still have a lot to learn about them, but talking about it and asking questions is really the only way that I'm ever going to learn.
And that's why people like me and Ari put ourselves out there, because if you're going to ask someone, better to ask someone who is open and receptive to that rather than the trans friend who doesn't know or who doesn't have any support system yet. So we try to put ourselves out there to be visible so that the person who doesn't have the platform and security that we do is not going to have to feel like they have to answer questions for people all the time. And trust me, they do. There have been some days where I'm like, I am not defining cis for you yet again. You have the Google machine.
It's really funny when, the stereotype, I think, of trans people is that if you ask them a question, they're going to like flip out and get all offended and be like, oh my God, I can't believe you're asking me that. That's so offensive. And, it does depend on the person. And there are some people who are just, not nice people who would do that. And there are some people who maybe would answer the question, but they don't feel safe talking to that person, or for some reason they don't feel like they can be open, or they just don't have the mental energy at that moment. And then there's people like me and Marissa who are like, yes, ask me all the questions. I love it. Like, I had one of my professors today after class, like, ask me, what pronouns should I call you by? And I was so happy that she asked me that question. I was like, oh my God, thank you so much. I really appreciate this. Because now she knows how to refer to me, and I don't have to be uncomfortable with her, using the wrong pronouns for me, thinking like, should I say something? Should I just let it go? Is it worth it? Now everybody's on the same page, and we're all happy about that.
Since you're already being all talky, I had a question that I wanted to ask you, Ari. Is that there are people, and possibly some of our listeners, who don't understand how you could arrive at, or in some cases even define, non-binary. Yeah, like, you're a stranger to this. Here, let me explain to you that there are some people out there who don't know what non-binary is.
Wait a second. This sounds fake. Trying to pull one of your cis tricks on me. I can see through this.
I've got cis mind control. So what I was wondering is, can I just ask you in your own words, not, just some weird dictionary definition, but what is non-binary to you, and how do you get there?
So non-binary essentially means anyone who doesn't identify as male or female. There are lots of different ways to be non-binary. You could be neither male nor female. You could be partially male and partially female, in equal amounts, in differing amounts. You could just not understand gender at all, which is pretty much where I go. I'm just like, what is that? I don't even know what it is. And it's hard for me to explain, like, how I know I'm non-binary other than just a process of elimination. I just see the options are there in broader society, which are male and female, and I look at both of them and I'm like, nope, I just don't relate with either of those. I just don't get what those are. I mean, it's hard for me to talk about because it's kind of ridiculous, because I spend so much of my time talking about gender and I really have no idea what gender is.
Okay.
I just know how I feel. Like, I can't really explain it other than, again, just a process of elimination. Like, I know I'm not that. I know I'm not that. And that's really all that it is.
Okay. So to dig a little bit deeper into that, are we talking purely social constructs of gender?
Well, it depends on how you define gender. Again, I'm not really sure what it is. I mean, there are social aspects of gender. There are cultural aspects. There's evidence that there's some biological aspects of gender. And, I don't know what it is that all combined to make me not identify with masculinity or femininity. Although, if I had to pick one, I'd say I'd probably go a little bit towards the masculine side. But I think that's most likely just as a reaction to my feminized upbringing, probably.
Okay.
So, again, it's hard to say. Like, it's not that I'm non-binary because I don't like dresses and makeup, because, liking a dress and makeup doesn't make you a girl. It doesn't make you a boy. It doesn't make you an anything. It just makes you a person who likes a dress and makeup. But, when I look at, for example, cis women, I'm just like, I just don't relate to you. And I look at most cis men and I'm like, I don't really relate to you either. I'm just like kind of, and I relate to some parts of both. And again, each individual is different, but there are, trends among the general population. And I'm just like, I just don't see myself really fitting in with either of these options.
Okay. And to a certain extent, I think that I can identify with that. Like, I don't think that it's hard for me to understand that, because I've always been kind of an odd example of a man myself, where, if I'm in a group of men, I just want to leave. I don't understand them.
I don't blame you.
They make me uncomfortable.
That too.
I want to say I'm much more at ease with women, like in a group of women, but I think my problem is that we have this cultural stereotype of a man that is just so ridiculous to me. I wouldn't ever even want to be that. And I'm just like, I'm just going to be me. And then when I go shopping with my girlfriend and we go through the shoe aisle, I'm going to like, oh, those are so cute. And that's just kind of how I am. Because I kind of feel like, my whole life, I have had this model of what a man is supposed to be, and I just reject it because I feel like it's stupid. And
It is stupid.
It really is. I swear, it's so dumb.
How many times have you heard a stand-up comedian be like, women think this and men are like this? It's like, I'm not either one of those things. That makes no sense.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, I was going to ask you if you two would allow me to heck assist. Can I do that?
Absolutely.
All right. So I haven't heard you do this one, and it's relatively new, but I wanted to bring up Jeff Mateer, who is the latest Drumpf bomb in the war of homogeny. And he said that trans children are evidence of Satan's plan. So
Cool.
It's obviously very loving and Christian to demonize children and validate prejudice against them. This idiot is vile. And he's a judicial nominee, so no, he doesn't belong on a bench in a courtroom anywhere, let alone at the federal level. So heck you, Jeff.
Heck 'em.
It's the Trump administration. You know how that's going to go.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's too easy. It's like low-hanging fruit.
He'll probably replace Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and we'll all cry.
Oh, good Lord. No.
Yeah, that's
I
the
don't
world
like
we
it.
live in.
No, RBG needs to live forever.
She really does.
Yeah, that being said, what I wanted to ask you is, given that Satan seems so much more fun than God, shouldn't we hope that trans kids are bringing the party to us?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
Satan's plan. Let's go.
yeah, let's get on that. Because obviously this Christian God plan coming out isn't working so well. Look at all these hurricanes we're allowed to cause.
Right. Could you please stop causing hurricanes?
No.
I'm sorry. No.
I'm powerful enough to cause a hurricane, but not powerful enough to stop the hurricane that I caused. Kind of like
Yeah, it's like once you set it into motion.
yeah.
Yeah, it's the
Exactly.
trans equivalent of rock so big that he himself could not throw it.
I love that.
I have a gender so weird that even I don't know what it is.
We caused a hurricane so big even we couldn't stop it. See, it all comes together, just
Nice.
like trans people.
All right. Well, sorry. I forgot one thing. You have the new Trans Podcaster Visibility Project.
We sure do.
And I can't believe I almost forgot to ask you about that. Please tell us about that and pimp the hell out of it.
Well, it's something we started with the idea of helping more trans people get access to podcasting. Because with all the places that we are easily discriminated against and things were denied, like basic housing and food and whatever else, all the places where trans people can be economically disadvantaged at a higher percentage than most of the population. Me, Callie, Ari, Trav Mamone, and some of the other trans podcasters in our community sort of came together and had this idea of not only unifying our small percentage of the podcasting community, but also trying to use that platform that we do have as somewhat privileged trans people to help other people get their voices. And but it's not all running yet. We're still working out some of the kinks and trying to get everything underway. But generally the idea is to find trans people who are interested in starting their own podcast and maybe don't have the knowledge or don't have the startup costs. And that way, not only are they coming into a community that they're already associated with people who do it, but that they don't have to do it alone and that we can help them out. That was kind of our idea behind it, because this is enlightened as the atheist community thinks it is. Even this year at ReasonCon, I was confused for Callie. Callie was confused for me. Celeste was confused for both of us. So we have a long way.
Aiden was confused for me.
That's right.
no.
Aiden was confused for Ari, which is fair. They look exactly alike. But
Okay, so then in order to do this, because I can also testify that trying to start up a podcast is not free, are you going to be setting up a Patreon, or do you have a Patreon or some other kind of, PayPal or funding method that maybe we can start soliciting people for?
not yet. We're still working that part of it out. But we'll likely be a 501c3, which means that we won't be able to use Patreon because it is a for-profit money raising. But we'll probably use PayPal, and we'll probably come up with some merchandise that we'll sell strictly to raise money for the project. So the more details we have with that will be announced. If you follow the Facebook page, Trans Podcaster Visibility Initiative on Facebook, it's really easy to find. And I think within a couple days, it already had almost 450 likes. So
That's awesome.
obviously people are kind of buying into that idea and seem to be supporting it.
And we will definitely take your money if you want to give it, but not yet because we don't have anywhere to put it yet. But when we do, we'll let you know.
Okay, I'm holding on to my money until you tell me to fork it over.
That's right. Put your money aside. You don't need it.
All right. Yeah, we will definitely point people to the Facebook page. And I always put as many links in my show notes as I possibly can because I really want to steer people to, everything that you're doing and everything that you see as important. So what else can you shout out to listeners to find the both of you?
Well, I'm on Facebook a lot. My name's Ari Stillman on there, as it is also in real life, my name as well. Of course, the Sis Are Getting Out of Hand podcast. I'm also on the Gaytheist Manifesto with Callie Wright. And I host this shitty little other show called the SJW Circle Jerk with Jeremiah Traeger. It's terrible. Don't listen to it ever. And I'd also like to plug a good show, which I do the audio editing for. It's called Reasonable Risk with Michael Schaefer. It is not your average atheist show. It actually has new information and a new niche. And I am actively disparaging all the shows that aren't like that, especially the SJW Circle Jerk. It's a really, really good show. Please check it out.
Okay, excellent.
The easiest place to find kind of the central place of the 84,000 podcasts that I'm on is rismccool.com, RISMCCOOL. All my books are on there if you want to get them personally signed. And the home for my podcasts are there. As far as the podcast that I'm on, my primary podcast is the Inciting Incident podcast, which puts out its 110th episode this week. Woo. And, we celebrated 100 episodes with a live show, and I got way too trashed, but it was still fun. Our show, The Sis Are Getting Out of Hand, is not available on iTunes because iTunes keeps rejecting it, but it's on Stitcher, Google Play, Spreaker, and we also have a manual RSS if your Apple podcast app is being transphobic and doesn't want it. I co-host the Doubting Dogma podcast with Molly and Mormon. I am on my husband's podcast called For Trans Men, and I'm only on it to be the idiot to ask the questions. I also am releasing my audiobooks in about 20-minute segments at a time on a little show called Storytime with Rissy. And then I've been on a great number of podcasts, including all the ones that Ari has, and then anything from Scathing to Reasonable Risk to God Awful Movies, Cognitive Dissonance. Like I've gotten around a little bit. I'm a bit of what you might call the Trans Village bicycle of podcasting.
Oh, no. Okay.
Yep. If there's a show, I've been on it.
Yep. Well, and what really made me want to have the two of you on the podcast is that I have, through other shows initially heard of you and listened to you. And I love what you're doing. I love your personalities. And I just had to have you on here. So I'm so glad that you gave me so much of your time. I hope that I get to talk to you two again soon.
Sure. Anytime.
Religious people who object to same-sex marriage can't justify their objections rationally. If they say that marriage is ordained by God for heterosexual believers, but they don't object to heterosexual non-believers being married, then they're clearly arguing against something else. If they say that the purpose of marriage is procreation, but they're fine with infertile people getting married, then they're clearly arguing something else. Any argument against same-sex marriage I've ever heard breaks down when examined under the logic of a third grader. Yet, they continue to use these arguments. I have a theory. The people making these arguments are bigoted, and they know it, but by using coded language, they hope to disguise their bigotry and lay the burden elsewhere in an attempt to feel better about being a bigot. We see through this, Because marriage has been around since before Judaism or Christianity or Islam was dreamed up by insecure people, I think it's safe to say it's not a religious institution. At its core, marriage is a civil agreement between consenting adults that is legally recognized for purposes of financial decision-making, property rights, and end-of-life concerns. Whether you're religious or not, you go through the same process of obtaining a marriage license from a government authority and signing it just like every other legal contract. And just like every other contract, it can be broken, and the government, not God, specifies to what each party is entitled and for what each party is responsible. That doesn't sound religious to me. I mean, even when religious people say that same-sex couples can't get married, but they can have a civil union, they're acknowledging that their idea of marriage is nothing more than magic words. You can be married, but you can't call it being married? How about we just agree that you can speak, but you just can't call it English? Because your grasp on language is tenuous, at best. Marriage is a civil union, and a civil union is marriage. Why muddy the waters and draw a non-existent distinction? Does it make you feel better than those people who aren't you? Go fuck yourself. Look, I recently had an infuriating discussion online with a person who insisted that same-sex couples can't get married because butt sex is gross. I'm paraphrasing, but only slightly, and if it wouldn't throw me into a white-hot rage, I'd read you the exchange. But that's what this is all about, right? Things you think are gross should be outlawed? Well, I think it's disgusting to simulate drowning children, but I'm not trying to outlaw baptism. I think it's disgusting to pretend you're a cannibal, but I'm not trying to outlaw the Eucharist. I could point out that straight people have butt sex too, but that's not why they get married, and it's not why homosexual men get married either. Guess what, morons? You don't have to be married to have sex. I know, that's crazy, right? Who knew? The reason same-sex partners want to get married is the same reason straight people want to get married. Because they want to ruin another person's life. No. What I mean to say is that they recognize, like me, that there are certain civil rights afforded to married couples that aren't afforded to or protected for unmarried couples. And because the law allows for the application of a marriage license and the signing of a marriage contract, that's their best bet to have those rights you take for granted. Are you honestly so petty as to deny people rights that you already have just because they're different from you? Are you honestly going to let your opinion of what's gross or not influence the way other people live their lives? Are you seriously going to continue making the same tired, stupid, nonsense arguments because you just don't want to admit that you're an asshole? My guess? Yes, and yes.
Random verse.
Our random verse this week comes from Deuteronomy 22, verses 28 and 29. It goes like this.
If a man find a damsel that is a virgin, which is not betrothed, and lay hold on her, and lie with her, and they be found, then the man that lay with her shall give unto the damsel's father 50 shekels of silver, and she shall be his wife. Because he hath humbled her, he may not put her away all his days.
Trigger warning?
Oh, yeah. So, post hoc trigger warning. We're reading the Bible. This is one of the worst verses in the Bible, one of the worst laws. And yeah, like everybody knows it, but nobody wants to acknowledge it. And a lot of people just kind of explain it away. But we're basically talking about a person raping a woman and then her being forced to marry him, which is fucked up.
That's some straight Game of Thrones stuff right there.
That's worse than Game of Thrones stuff. But I mean, so if somebody does this to another person, then they're supposed to pay the girl's father 50 shekels of silver. And a shekel is a measure of weight.
25 schmeckles will get you a ride down the stairs or a nice pair of boobies.
Nice reference. 1 shekel equals 11 grams. And 50 of these, in case you can't do math in your head, is 550 grams. Logan, do you know what the current price per gram of silver is today?
I'm going to guess a dollar. Wait, per gram of silver?
Yeah, 1 gram of silver.
A quarter.
Oh, you're all over the place. You're like $1, a quarter. What is it?
Well, I didn't realize a gram. I'm going to say a quarter.
Okay, it's 59 cents. So that means you can pay off your rape victim's dad for $319 and never get punished for it.
That's pretty awful.
Yeah, it's really terrible.
To be fair, though, that doesn't translate into modern day society. But yeah, that is pretty terrible.
Well,
even for back then.
Right. Obviously, we do not do these things this way in modern society because there are 2 types of judgments in law, criminal and civil. A criminal judgment carries a penalty you owe to the government, and a civil judgment carries a penalty you owe to the victim. This verse details a crime against another person that carries absolutely no criminal judgment of any kind, and then bypasses and essentially punishes the victim by making a boilerplate penalty all about the victim's family. If this were justice, then the rapist would have to serve a criminal penalty, and the victim would be entitled to bring a civil case on her own behalf.
This is pretty terrible, and the more and more we talk about it, the angrier I get. Like, this kind of stuff, it's just not good. That's really all I have to say about this.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is not an outlier. If you go through the Old Testament and you go through the Mosaic Law, and if you go through like the 319 commands that were given to the Jews from God, then you're going to find a whole bunch of stuff that is either just disgusting and awful like this one, or just complete and utter nonsense.
Yeah.
But that's why, I mean, you've heard people talk about how this is a Christian nation and our morality is founded on the 10 commandments, right?
Yeah.
Well, it's not. It's not in any conceivable way. And this verse is an example of why our secular government is far superior from any sort of religious rule or any kind of biblical morality. So, in the culture of the Old Testament, women were considered just property. They were an asset that their family had that they could use as a bargaining chip for raising their status through a marriage to another family. So once that piece of property was sullied and the bargaining chip wasn't as attractive to other families, it was seen as a tangible loss to the patriarch, and that's why he gets all the schmeckles. But we don't do this nowadays because we realize, A, women aren't pieces of property, and B, victims themselves have rights. So screw the Bible and its morality. And I don't know. I'm just glad that we live in a country with a secular government, even though that's trying to be smashed into pieces by the current administration. I don't think that that's going to happen.
Yeah. I hope not. And I mean, honestly, I think that it would take a whole lot of stupidity, even more than Donald Trump levels of stupidity, to get us to a point where things would be like this level of bad. But I guess we never thought that Donald Trump would become president, so who knows?
That is true. But I mean, if you look at, say, Mike Pence and his attitude toward religion and its importance in society, it becomes very clear that they are just blind and ignorant of how theocracies actually work. Because we can look around at like Iran and Afghanistan and Saudi Arabia, and we can see these examples of societies that are completely founded on religion and ruled by sacred texts and people who interpret them, and they're terrible. They're almost universally terrible. But then you have like Mike Pence and Mike Huckabee and people like that who are just like, no, we should definitely use the 10 Commandments as the basis for everything. And that would be just as bad. It would be every bit as bad. Just like this verse.
Yeah, it would.
So
there's like one good testament, and even that one is questionable.
Well, that one, yeah, exactly. I mean, we've already pointed out multiple places in the New Testament where they had plenty of opportunity to contradict this garbage in the Old Testament, and they just chose not to. So clearly, the Bible really doesn't have a whole lot to offer us in the way of morality and general goodness.
So, on a scale of 1 Mr. Booby Buyer to 25 schmeckles, how terrible is this verse?
This one, honestly, this one just does not even rate. This one it's so bad, it just doesn't even belong on a rating scale. That's what I'm going with.
Literally cannot even rate.
I literally cannot even.
No rating for you, dudology,
Dudology.
Astronomy.
Fuck you, Bible.
Fuck you, Bible. Clink.
And now we're divorcing this episode, but we'll keep making this podcast work for the kids. I want to thank all of our listeners for their continued support, and I'd like to ask that you like and share us on Facebook and Twitter, and rate our podcast on every podcatcher possible. Until next week, if you have questions or comments, please send us an email to podcast@waywardwillis.com. Intro music was provided by Austin Colon and used with permission. You can find more of Austin's music linked in the show notes. This podcast is a media production of Willisware LLC. All rights reserved.
This has been The Wayward Willis. If you liked what you just heard and you want more of Jon and Logan, you can follow us on Twitter @WaywardWillis, Facebook at facebook.com/TheWaywardWillis, or at willisweb.com. If you want to help the show and have a few extra dollars, you can donate per episode or per month on Patreon at patreon.com/wayward. We'll be back next week.